I'm beginning to understand that when we change the way we look at things, I think we look at change. And I don't mean that in a physical sense, in that if I have this pen, for example, and I change the way that I'm looking at this pen, then it'll no longer be a pen. But I really mean in the sense that I think so often we attach value, emotional value, to things that inherently there is no emotional value there. And I don't mean that in like relationships and in a people sense, but I really just mean that in an object sense and in a scenario sense. In that it's the saying that's like, oh, the water can either be cold and miserable or it can just be cold. I think that so often we try to attach these negative labels to the things that are around us, and in doing so, we allow that negativity to permeate into our emotions and into our daily lives. But I'm really starting to understand that the labels that we put on things, it's really not what it is. Like I said, the water can either be cold and miserable or it can just be cold. We attach the label of miserable to the water, even though it's not inherent to the water's nature. So I'm really starting to understand that I think so often in the scenarios that we find ourselves in, it's almost that the lacking and the abundance, that duality that we see, it's something that we create for ourselves. It's like if you have a plate of food, it could either be a little bit of food or it could be a lot of food. It just depends on what you're referencing it to. So I'm really starting to understand that if you just reference everything to itself, then there's no longer any place for comparison. There's no longer any place for lacking, because then everything is fully abundant in what it is. It's it's like if the only number that existed was one, then one would be the greatest number. But if one and two exist, then all of a sudden one seems small compared to two. It's like that. I'm really just starting to understand that when we change the way that we look at the world, when we change the perspective that we have into it, when we almost start seeing things as they are and not what they are in relation to anything else, then those things really start to shine. They really start to appear, and not even just appear, but be better and be more positive for us. Because then we're no longer attaching those signs of negativity. We're no longer attaching the qualities that we don't necessarily need to those objects. We're no longer attaching them to those scenarios, to those situations. So then we really just start seeing everything as it is. And I think that once you finally start seeing the things as they are, then you start realizing that everything is full of joy, everything is full of life. It's almost, and everything's full of a lesson. But it's almost that we just don't allow ourselves to see it. When I say when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change, I mean in the sense that everything can be positive. But it takes a matter of almost putting on the right kinds of glasses to see that positivity, for that positivity to actually enter into your daily life. And I'm also just really starting to understand that so much of what we do is dependent on the way that we look at things. I think that, I always go back to this analogy or a similar, but when you're exercising, for example, exercising can be a really negative and miserable experience for someone, or it could be a really, really positive and enriching experience, but it's fully dependent on who you think yourself as. If you tell yourself that you like exercising, if you tell yourself that you like running, you like dieting, then who's to say that you don't? It's like that, and it's not like in a sense of you're lying to yourself in that, oh, I'm saying that I like this when I really don't, but it's really just allowing yourself to feel the positivity of liking that said thing. And in doing so, I think that any negative experience, anything that we almost need to do but we don't necessarily want to do, then becomes something that we want to do. And I'm really just starting to understand that in my daily life. I was working a bit like internally today on just my ideal self and exactly who that person is and who that person I want to be is. And I'm just trying to allow myself to emotionally feel what that person would feel, even if I don't necessarily have all those qualities on a physical level. And I think that in doing so, it's almost just allowing the rest of it to come naturally to you. It's like I said that, you should attract and you shouldn't chase. It's similar to that in the sense that I think that everything around us is almost based on our identity. It's based on who we think ourselves as. So if you start thinking of yourself as a more positive person, then you're going to start seeing more positive things around the world. But if you think of yourself as a miserable person, then you start seeing more miserable things around the world. It's like, I think it was a Theo Von podcast. It was something like that, maybe an interview, where he was with Tony something. I forgot his name. But then he said, look around the room and counted how many things you see that are brown. So then he did that. And then he said, okay, then like count the amount of things that are red. And then afterwards he asked him, he said, well, there's really not that much brown or that much red in this room, but I'm sure that you started seeing things that were maybe like a burgundy color and you started calling those red. We started calling those brown. And so it's like that. It's almost that when you allow yourself to see the things that you want to see, then they appear more often. And like I said, that's not to lie to yourself or to almost deny what reality is and deny what is there, but it's almost just allowing yourself to see the positivity in everything instead of the negativity in everything. Because I think it's something that we do inherently. So often we look at things and we're like, oh, this is such a negative experience. But it's only negative because you're saying it's negative. It's only negative because you're feeling that negativity. So I think that if you change that mindset, you change that perspective into thinking more positively about things, that things will begin to be more positive for you. You'll begin to see more positivity in your life. And the last part. But this is really like I forgot, it's one part of the brain, but it's like it focuses on the things that are in your point of view almost. It's like, this is another example, but it's like when you begin to say, oh, I want a red car, then all of a sudden you start seeing so many red cars on the road. It's not necessarily that there were more red cars on the road, it's just that you begin seeing it more. And I think it's that way with positivity and negativity as well. If you notice negativity, if you almost want to see the negativity in the world, then you begin to see the negativity in everything. But then if you begin to want to see the positive in the world, then you'll begin to see the positive in everything. And that goes for lacking in abundance as well. It's like the glass is half empty or half full. Both are correct in a physical sense. But then which one do you want to see? Do you want to see lacking or do you want to see abundance? And I think that if we choose to see abundance, then we just begin to see that more in our day-to-day lives. And if that permeates into our identities, I think that that can genuinely impact how we act in the world and then how much abundance we actually have to ourselves. That's all to say. I think that when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. But it's all about, obviously, having faith in God and having faith that the abundance is there. Because I think that if you don't necessarily recognize God and you don't recognize the goodness that he offers, then you almost become overwhelmed by the negativity of the world. But yeah, I have a Bible verse that goes with the topic of this video pretty well. Take from Romans 12 verse 2, and it says, "Do not conform to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your spirit," or the renewal of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. So I really just think it's about recognizing all the good that God can do in your life and recognizing all the good that God already has done in your life. And once you recognize that and you almost turn away from just looking at the material world and looking at things as the negativity that we're almost programmed as human beings to look at, then we begin to see all the positivity in life. We begin to see the positivity of God's kingdom, and through him saving us, it's almost that positivity, it's everlasting life, it's everlasting goodness, and his kingdom is really forever. So I hope you took something from this video. This is just a few of the things I've been thinking about recently. Just understanding a lot more about myself, about my life, and then just about the direction that I want to take it, exactly where I want to be and who I want to be. So yeah, I hope maybe this inspires some thought, maybe this inspired something, maybe some emotion, something like that. And yeah, just thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. Just do what you can with what you have. Do the best that you can. And yeah, just try to be a bit more positive in your day. And I think you'll begin to see that positivity in everything. Thank you.